Greetings, everybody. So in this video, we are going to discuss a generalized attention deficient disorder chaotic model with Soboleva hyperbolic tangent functions. Basically, we are going to discuss about chaotic neural networks and how can they be used to model the phenomenon of attention deficient disorder, and especially considering asymmetric activation functions. Okay, this is a work that is very international from colleagues in Poland and the UK, and it was presented in the very recent MOCAST conference 2025 that took place in Dresden. Okay, in the description of the video, I'm going to put a link for you to download and read the paper, which is published in IEEE Explore. Okay, also these are the information about the funding for this specific paper. Okay, so let's begin. As I told you, basically we're going to talk about chaotic neural networks, then discuss a little bit the phenomenon of attention deficit disorder, the role of activation functions, and then of course we're going to close as always with future topics. Now, let's discuss a little bit about chaos. Now, I'm assuming you have already seen my videos on chaos in YouTube. I have many videos explaining chaos. If you are interested in that, you can go watch them as well. If you are unfamiliar with chaos, let me give you a very fast explanation. Chaos refers to dynamical systems either in continuous time, so differential equations, or discrete time, which are called difference equations. And these types of systems are nonlinear and they showcase a very extreme sensitivity to changes in their parameters or initial conditions. In this graph, for example, I'm using a map called the logistic map, which is a discrete time system. And I have plotted here the solution of 50 different solutions, and all of them start from very close, around 0.1. So all of them are very close to 0.1, but not identical. And you see that all of these solutions, initially, they all look identical, they all look the same. But after around 40 iterations, which means I start computing x0, x1, x2, x3, x4, x5, x6, and so on. And for the first few iterations, the solutions look completely the same. So this minuscule change that they have in x0 remains small, but after a while, this small difference becomes larger and larger and larger. And well, eventually, as you see, after the 40th iteration, the solutions become completely different from one another. Okay, so this is basically the phenomenon called the butterfly effect, and this happens in chaotic systems. So a very small change in due time becomes larger and larger and larger until eventually the solutions look completely different from one another. Okay, so this phenomenon called the butterfly effect is very common in many systems in nature. So I would dare say we use chaos, and chaos appears in the modeling of physical systems, in engineering, in biology, in human physiology, in chemistry, in economical systems, whatever, you name it. Actually, chances are, I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying that pretty much all systems in nature are chaotic. Really, it's very unlikely that in the real world you're gonna find a truly purely linear system. Okay, almost all systems in nature are non-linear, and almost all of them have a chaotic effect. Okay, have a chaotic behavior. So we are using chaos to model many different phenomena in nature. In this video, we are going to discuss biology and specifically human physiology. Okay. By the way, I also have some other videos in my channel about this. Chaotic systems are also used for data encryption, for secure communications, for other applications irrelevant to modeling. I have many videos in my channel about that. So let's talk about chaotic neural networks. What are chaotic neural networks? Chaotic neural networks are used a lot in the modeling of physical phenomena, and specifically biological phenomena. They can either be continuous time, so modeled through differential equations, or discrete time, which is what we are doing here. They are modeled through discrete time chaotic maps. A chaotic map is basically an iterative function. The logistic map is a common example. You may not know this, but another common example of a iterative function is the Fibonacci sequence. Okay, so each iteration is the result of the previous iteration. Okay, so this is what we call difference equation, or a map. So in these types of systems, we use very minimal types of artificial, of course, neural networks. So they usually consist of a couple of activation functions, which are modeled most commonly using the hyperbolic tangent function, that well-known tan activation function. Some of these functions, some of these neurons have positive terms, so they model, oops, I'm sorry, they model excitatory brain action. Some of these neurons have negative terms, so they have negative gain, so they model inhibitory brain action. And their combination, basically, when used in order to create a chaotic map, is used to try and understand and observe how we have information propagating through the system. So as I told you, a chaotic map is basically an iterative function. So when considering artificial neural networks as chaotic maps, what we want to see is how this information propagates again and again and again through this network. Okay. So when I'm taking this output and feeding it back again into the system, how does this information, and when I say information, this is basically just a number, but this number, of course, models some sort of information inside the neural network. So as this information propagates inside the system between consecutive iterations, how does it change? Does this information eventually become stable, or it will change always within next and next and next iteration, which means that it will be chaotic? And that's what we are trying to model with chaotic neural networks. So at the moment, in the current literature, I would say there are around easily 20 to 30 publications on chaotic modeling, on chaotic neural networks. All of them consider low-dimensional neural networks with just a couple of neurons and maybe one or two, maybe three layers. And in these models, we are usually constructing these chaotic neural networks to model different physiological phenomena. For example, attention deficit disorder, which is the topic of our paper right here, migraine, seizure, epilepsy, bipolar disorder, or coma. Okay. What it is very interesting to note here is that in all of these systems, the emergence of chaos can either be a positive thing or a bad thing. Okay. So there may be situations where chaos is desirable because it is the natural behavior of the system. It should be chaotic, while in other situations, the system should not be chaotic, should be in a periodic regime. Okay. So by the way, this is a very interesting topic. I should draw your attention to a very recent paper by Olfa Bubaker, very well-known researcher, of course, in the community from 2024. The paper is in Chaos Theory and Applications, and it is called Chaos in Physiological Control Systems, Health or Disease. And in that paper, actually, the author talks and discusses a lot about this thing, about whether or not the emergence of chaos is desirable and not desirable. So the answer is not straightforward and it is not universal. The answer has to do with the model at hand. Okay. So what's the deal here? In all of the papers that I told you, that are around 30 or 4 or more, maybe, papers on the topic of modeling chaotic neurological disorders, all of the authors that construct chaotic maps use the very classic hyperbolic tangent activation function. This is the tanh that you see right here in black color. It's, I think, one of the most common activation functions, tanh or hyperbolic tangent. Okay, if you're somewhat familiar with neural networks and machine learning, probably you know the tanh function. One of the most common examples used in neural networks. Okay, the characteristic of this function, and it is why it is so popular, it is because it is very, very simple in structure, and it is symmetric around the origin. So all of the papers that I mentioned basically use hyperbolic tangent to model their neural networks. So this for me opens up a very big question because, as I told you, if you are somewhat familiar with machine learning and artificial intelligence, you know that in the literature there are many, many, many activation functions, okay? And many of them are asymmetric and also non-monotonic. So for me, this opens up a big question. What happens if we take this or any chaotic neural network and we replace the hyperbolic tangent with another activation function that is possibly non-symmetric? For me, this is very interesting because the breaking of symmetry could have a very interesting effect on the system. And also from a biological perspective, we are now talking about neurons that are non-symmetric in nature, which means that they give a different output to a negative or a positive input. Okay, so from a biological perspective and from a mathematical and geometrical perspective, this is very, very interesting. And this was the motivation for our work. And that's why we decided to consider in our model the Soboleva modified hyperbolic tangent. Okay, SMHT. This is the function that you see right here. It is a generalization of the tanh. And it is parameterized by four parameters, A, B, C, and D, the indexes that you see right here. Okay. The characteristic of this function is this, four new parameters, and secondly, in general, it is a non-symmetric activation function. So this function breaks the symmetry effect of the classic tanh. So what will happen now? Let's see. We thought of considering this SMHT, the Soboleva function, in a model for attention deficit disorder. You may be familiar with this term. It's very commonly discussed in social media, which is a very, very important and very famous neurological condition. Okay, it's a condition that you can actually detect in a person if you are an expert, of course, and you are have a specific training, of course. Now, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm just a mathematician. But to give you a short introduction, attention deficit disorder, and more commonly, they also add the term hyperactivity. So we have ADD or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's a neurological condition. It affects generally a person's ability to focus, sustain attention, and regulate behavior. The most common examples or phenomena in ADD is inattention, which means the difficulty of sustaining focus, disorganization, which means having trouble keeping track of some specific tasks or losing items, forgetfulness, so which means that if we're given some sort of directions or some tasks, we very quickly forget them, and avoidance, which means that we don't like to do tasks or jobs that we dislike. Okay. As I told you, it's a condition that you can actually monitor in a patient and you can actually detect in a patient. Very, very interesting problem. Very state of the art at the moment. So we thought, let's take a paper from 2015. You can see the information on the bottom, on the top right here. In this paper, the authors had a very minimal, which is very important, they have a very minimal neural network consisting of just two neurons in order to model the attention deficit disorder, which they considered ADD in the system appearing as the phenomenon of intermittency. But from my perspective, I believe also chaos can be considered ADD because basically it means that the energy of the time series changes abruptly over small periods of time, which happens in intermittency very clearly, but I believe chaos behavior can also fall under this interpretation. So we thought, in the original model, as I told you, they used hyperbolic tangent functions, which is very common for the neurons. Okay, so what will happen if we change the hyperbolic tangent to the Sobolev activation function, which is non-symmetric in nature? So this is the way we generalized their model. So we thought, what will happen when we change and break the symmetry in the system? So for that matter, I have a couple of bifurcation diagrams here. These are with respect to the original model parameter A, and the slices that you see are for different Soboleva parameters. So the slices, each diagram is for different Soboleva parameter value. So black is the original model, which of course has some dense transitions in and out of chaos. It has some crisis phenomena. And we see that when changing the Soboleva parameters, the model has a much more complex behavior. So what do we see? One observation is, as we observe these bifurcation diagrams, we see attractor shrinking. So as we change the Soboleva parameter, the attractor shrinks. But we also observe other interesting phenomena. For example, we have a lot of crisis phenomena where the attractor changes abruptly in and out of chaos, as you see right here, and right here, and right here. We also see attractor merging, and we have multiple attractors merging into a much larger attractor. We also have attractor changing their position very abruptly. So you see right here, the attractor is in this place, and then it gets dislocated into this point below. And again, here it goes from here to this point. So we have abrupt transitions of the attractor above and below, so they change position in the state space. This is an indication of possibly coexisting attractors here, which we also observe in the system, although I don't have them plotted. Okay. And also, the original system has some dense transitions in and out of chaos, but the new system has an even denser transitions in and out of chaos. You will see right here, for example, in the red graph, I plot it right here, and see this very, very small region right here. If you zoom in, you will observe antimonotonicity and very dense transition in this very, very, very small region in the state space. The system goes through a period doubling route to chaos, through crisis phenomena, and then through a period halving route outside of chaos. And this happens in a very, very small region. So the transitions in and out of chaos now become extremely dense. Okay. could be attributed to this interpretation of ADD that we are going very easily in and out of chaos as one parameter changes. So we have a very high sensitivity to initial conditions and to parameter changes, even higher than the original system. This happens with respect to one Soboleva parameter, but when I consider another Soboleva parameter, which is a beta parameter right here, we observe the similar phenomena. We again have attractor changing their position in the state space. You see here in the blue graph, it goes from up to down and then to up again. So these abrupt transitions are not good in the system. We have period doubling root to chaos, period halving root. We have attractor shrinkage. So we have a lot of more complex phenomena compared to the original map. Okay, each of these bifurcation diagrams could be studied individually and derive a lot of results about the system. So to gain a more deeper and more global perspective, what we did is plot Lyapunov exponent diagrams. What you see right here are graphs that show different values of the Lyapunov exponent for different pairs of the parameters of the system, A and B. So the black region denotes negative Lyapunov exponent, so periodicity, while colored regions denote chaotic phenomena appearing. So the original system had a very smooth graph, and of course in the original system you can still observe dense transitions in and out of chaos. As you see right here, we have color black, color black, color black. So the system transitions in and out of chaos very densely. But the whole graph is much smoother. In the right graph, which is the modified model that we have for different Soboleva parameters, you see that the graph is much less smoother. This is because we have a symmetry breaking effect. The transitions in and out of chaos are much denser. You see right here, we have very dense transitions. We have chaotic shrimps appearing. Shrimps are the shapes that you see right here, and 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 right here, right here. So the original system didn't have shrimps, but the new system has shrimps. And also, the shape is very irregular. While here it was much smoother and more, I would say, symmetric in nature, here this symmetry is completely lost. This makes sense because we are using non-symmetric activation functions. In both graphs, by the way, you can see very clear big regions of periodicity. So this is common in both graphs. We have some regions for very wide parameter values, we have periodicity. But in between chaos, the models are completely different. And this is with respect to the actual parameters of the model. Here I have another graph that I study the behavior under the Soboleva parameters. So A and B small are the actual values of the Soboleva function. You see some sort of symmetry with respect to changing A and B. If you plot the bisector, they are kind of symmetric, not completely. Again, you see small shrimps right here. Shrimps, shrimps, shrimps. You see very dense transitions in and out of chaos through and through. And again, we have this very weird shape where we have black region, periodicity all around, but in between we have this sort of weird rectangular, not symmetrical, sorry, cross that goes again into chaos. What is also important to note is that although inside this region right here, we have very dense transitions in and out of chaos, we also have a very wide region that you see it has very clear margin, this limit right here, that breaks, that not breaks, sorry, so that distinguishes chaotic phenomena from non-chaotic phenomena. So this region right here, it has complete loss of chaos. So I'm wondering if it is possible to compute mathematically this margin right here that I show you with my mouse that shows us that for lower values of the Soboleva parameters, we completely go outside of chaos. I'm not sure if we can actually compute this margin, but this could be very, very interesting result. But it is difficult because the model is mathematically very complex. It uses Tank functions and Soboleva functions, so it is very difficult to analyze. But as a phenomenon, it's very interesting to observe. So overall, what we did, we broke the symmetry in a model of an artificial chaotic neural network with two neurons using the Soboleva function. So the Soboleva function is a symmetry breaking function. It's an asymmetric function. It has four control parameters. So we added 4 degrees of freedom to the system, which is very important. We observed period doubling root to chaos. We observed period halving root away from chaos. We observe crisis phenomena where the attractor either breaks out of chaos abruptly, okay, the system, I'm sorry, breaks out of chaos abruptly, or the attractor changes size, or we have merging of attractors, or we have an attractor that moves into the state space abruptly. We observed antimonotonicity, very small chaotic bubbles. We observed coexisting attractors. I don't plot them here, but we actually have them. We observed intermittency, which in the original paper, this is what they consider to be ADD behavior. I believe personally ADD can also be attributed to chaotic behavior. Okay. We observed stream shapes, which we didn't see in the original paper. We observe also, as a general remark, very, very dense transitions in and out of chaos. And also we observed periodic regions, very big periodic regions. Now, from all of this analysis, for me, there are two extremely major observations about this system. First observation, the interpretation of the phenomena of chaos, intermittency, coexistence. How do we interpret this phenomena under the scope of attention deficit disorder? Okay. For me, and I believe most of you will agree, interpretation is not straightforward. Okay. Remember, ADD is a very complex behavior. It's a very complex phenomenon. On the other hand, here we have a map that is in structure extremely minimal, a very small neural network with just two neurons. Despite the fact, though, that the model is very minimal, its behavior is extremely complex, despite its simple structure. So how can we interpret this phenomena? It is not straightforward, and for me it is a very, very interesting problem under study, which can be further discussed from a mathematical perspective or from a biological perspective. So this is a very, very interesting discussion for future studies. The second observation is this. We are using a non-symmetric activation function. So this non-symmetry, this asymmetry in the activation function, is it a healthy or is it an ill behavior? This for me is another very interesting question, which is open. This is up to interpretation, but I believe it is very interesting. So the fact that a neuron is non-symmetric, which means that it gives a different output for positive or negative signals, is this a sign of a healthy neuron, which means that the neuron is very adaptable to input signals? Or is it a sign of an ill behavior because the neuron shouldn't be changing the output compared to the positive or negative input? For me, this is a very open problem. Again, it is very interesting either from a mathematical perspective or from a biological perspective. And again, it is up for interpretation. And I believe it is very interesting to see how non-symmetric activation functions behave in chaotic neural networks. So this is a very, very interesting problem for future discussions. Okay. So in general, for our future studies, what we want to do is probably consider other activation functions. Soboleva is a great choice, but in the literature, there are many more activation functions that we can consider, all of them up to interpretation, of course. We can possibly consider more layers in the neural network because this neural network is very minimal, which is a good thing for me, but we can also make it bigger and consider more layers. Moreover, apart from including more layers, what we can do is consider other network types. So what will happen if we change the actual type of the network instead of a standard fully connected neural network? What we consider other problems here, other networks here. These are all interesting topics for potential papers. And of course, another very challenging topic is to try and see if we can fit this model to real data. So let's say we take some data from an electroencephalogram and we try and see whether or not it is possible to fit this to this sort of network. I doubt we can do it in such a small network, but if, as I told you, we add more layers or change the network type and we have a much bigger chaotic neural network, maybe it would be possible to consider identification techniques like SINDI, sparse identification, to try and fit our model to real data. I don't know if it will be possible. Probably we will change the model and make it much more bigger and more complex, but it is again an interesting problem under study. So overall, a very interesting topic of study. In the description of the video, I'm gonna put the link to the paper so you can download it and read it. As I told you, it's from August 2025 that happened in Dresden. Thank you very much. Any questions, of course, write them down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.